Hello, this is part two of the brain. So today we're going to learn about what's called the cerebral cortex and how it's divided. There's a lot of information. Why? Because the cerebral cortex is awesome. It is it is the outer wrinkly part of the brain. It's only, I don't know, maybe half a centimeter thick, okay? But when you look at the outer wrinkly part, you are looking at a part of your brain that is made up of densely packed neurons that we call gray matter. Now, gray is good, gray matter is good. The brain is made up of gray matter and it's made up of white matter. And gray matter, this is what it looks like. Gray matter is very densely packed neurons, and that's where all your thinking happens. You see all the white stuff? Okay, that, as far as we know, is just connective tissue. But the gray matter is where all the really good stuff happens. That's the cerebral cortex. And the cerebral cortex is divided into lobes, and these are the lobes, and you need to have these memorized: the frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. You need to have all that memorized. And also, your brain is divided into left brain and right brain. Those are called hemispheres. If you're taking notes, hit pause, draw this. In class, I have my students draw this on their note card and write down everything. Everything on here is important. Okay? So hit pause and do that, but I'm going to keep going. So let's talk about the frontal lobe. Now, the frontal lobe is very large and it contains a lot of important parts of your brain. It contains the prefrontal cortex, motor cortex, Broca's area. So let's go ahead and let's talk about the parts of the frontal lobe. Now, in the video I asked you to watch, it talks about the frontal lobe a lot, but a lot of what they said the frontal lobe does, what they really meant was the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is involved in personality, planning, rational thought, and emotional control. So, what do I mean by that? Well, let's say you see something really scary like a snake, and you go, "Oh my God." And then what'll happen? Your amygdala will light up: fear, fear, danger, danger. But then your prefrontal cortex will kick in and go, "Whoa, chill out. It's just a garden hose." You see that? So your prefrontal cortex takes over and tells your amygdala to chill out. That's emotional control. That's part of what your prefrontal cortex is. All right, now let me ask you a question. Something else that the prefrontal cortex does. I want you to think about what you're going to do tomorrow. Go ahead, think about it. You just use your prefrontal cortex. When you think about the future, when you plan, when you think about your prefrontal cortex, you think about the future, that is your prefrontal cortex. It allows you to plan and think about the future. That's something that humans do better than any other animal. Okay? So, the reason why young men, their car insurance rates are so high until they hit the age 25 is because young men's prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until about the age 25. Girls, y'all's prefrontal cortex is pretty well developed by the age of 20. That's why y'all don't get in as many car wrecks between the ages of 20 and 25. Okay? They won't even let you rent a car until you're about 25 years old because your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed. Okay? So, the most obvious difference between the human brain and the brain of a carp, a dumb fish, would be in the what? Okay, so on an evolutionary scale, what is the most evolutionarily advanced part of the human brain? The answer is D, the cerebral cortex. That's what really makes us human. All right, in the frontal lobe, you have the motor cortex. What is the motor cortex? And you can see it's purple here. The motor cortex is the part of your body that allows you to move parts of your body on purpose. So if I move my hands, then I'm using my motor cortex. If I'm typing on a keyboard, if I'm walking, anytime I move a part of my body on purpose, that I am using the motor cortex. Okay? And that is in the frontal lobe. Now, moving on to another lobe just behind it. On this picture, it's green. We call that the somatosensory cortex. I'm reading it off the picture, somatosensory cortex. I always say sensory cortex for short. It's the part that deals with touch sensations. So if I were to get slapped on my left arm, then I would feel that in my somatosensory cortex. Okay? If I were to get a sunburn, I would feel the pain in my somatosensory cortex. Okay? That is in the parietal lobe. That is in the parietal lobe. Keep in mind that because of the thalamus, the wires are switched. If you get slapped on your left arm, you will feel that on the right side of your somatosensory cortex. If you move your right arm, that is coming from your left motor cortex. Okay? So your left motor cortex controls the movement of your right leg. Okay? Because of the thalamus, it's switched. Okay? Now think about this. When you get a stroke, if you get a stroke on the left side of your brain, then you're going to go numb on the right side of your body. Okay? So if you see somebody and their left side of their face is sagging, then you know that the stroke was on the right side of their brain, on the opposite side. Okay? All right, so let's try this. What would you expect to occur if your prefrontal cortex was damaged? Okay, so you think, what does the prefrontal cortex do? Planning and reasoning. Okay. By the way, that's a very common question from me and from the AP exam is that to get you to apply your knowledge of the brain, they ask you what would happen if that part of the brain had a tumor on it? What would happen if that part of the brain was damaged? It's a very common question. So, same thing, paralysis. All right. Paralysis of the left leg might be explained by a problem in the what? Okay, hit pause if you need to. All right, so paralysis means you cannot move it. All right, so moving your leg comes from the motor cortex. So that rules out C. Okay. Now it's the left leg, so it needs to be on the right side of your body, on the right hemisphere, the right hemisphere of the brain. So that leaves you with E, and it leaves you with Bravo, B. So now, where is the motor cortex? Is the motor cortex in the frontal lobe or is the motor cortex in the occipital lobe? The answer is B. Now, that was an interesting question. There's a lot of layers to that one. Okay. Now, I don't think I've never seen this on the AP exam, but it's really interesting. This is called the homunculus. A homunculus is a work of art that illustrates how much space your brain dedicates to different parts of your body. So if you're looking here, you can see that our brain dedicates a lot of space to our hands and to our lips and our mouths, but not so much to our elbows or our genitals. Our genitals are pretty dumb. Our elbows are pretty dumb. So the bigger it is on this picture, the more space your brain dedicates to that part of the body. Same thing here, just not as cool. So your parietal lobe, which is right above your spine, it's right on top of your brain, contains your sensory cortex or your somatosensory cortex. It does some other stuff too, like where you are in space, something like spatial recognition. I think your GPS is in your brain, in your parietal lobe. Okay, the area that directs the body's muscles is called what? That is called the motor cortex. It's in the frontal lobe. Occipital lobe. Think optical. Occipital lobe, optical. It's in the back of your brain. Okay, look at your notes. The occipital lobe is in the back. Okay, it's in the back right here. And your occipital lobe contains your visual cortex. So think about this. What would happen if you got a tumor on your visual cortex, a tumor on your occipital lobe? What do you think would happen if you damaged it? Then you would have trouble seeing. You might go blind. Okay. If an individual has lost the ability to feel pain in the left arm, there is most likely damage to what area of the brain? Okay, so it's left arm, so that means it needs to be on the right side of your body. Okay, so it's not A, it's not B. So where do you get the touch feeling of pain? Frontal lobe, occipital lobe, parietal lobe. The answer is D. Parietal lobe has your sensory cortex. Okay. Temporal lobe. That's where you get your hearing from. Hearing and language. That's also right now, if you are hearing me talk and you are trying to understand the words that I'm saying, you are using your left temporal lobe. Your temporal lobe has your auditory cortex. Now, one thing I want to tell you about your temporal lobes is that what goes in your right ear goes to your thalamus and then is processed on both sides of your brain, on your left and your right temporal lobes. Okay? That's a lot of information, but that's how it is. And your temporal lobes are near your ears. So your temporal lobe is about right in here, and it contains your auditory cortex. Okay? So remember, go back to the drawing. I hope you drew this. Your temporal lobe is right here. Okay? All right. All right. So what is Wernicke's area? And we write this down. This is important. Okay. So hit pause if you want to write this down. Wernicke's area is behind your left ear. It's usually on your left side. And what happens is that if you get a stroke or a tumor on this part of your brain, you won't be able to understand language. So if I were talking to you and you damaged your Wernicke's area, you might hear me say something like you wouldn't be able to understand what I was saying. You would have what's called Wernicke's aphasia. Wernicke's aphasia is when you damage your Wernicke's area through a tumor or through a stroke. And that is on your left side of your brain. Remember, your left side of your brain controls language. La, 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 left, la, 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 language. Left side controls language. Now, go up to your left, touch your left temple. Go ahead, touch your left temple. That is your Broca's area. Okay, by the way, going back to Wernicke's aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia is when you damage your Wernicke's area. Okay. Broca's area deals with speech. That's your left temple. It's about where your left temple is. It's in your frontal lobe. And if you get a stroke and you damage your Broca's area, you will not be able to speak. So if you have Broca's aphasia, you might be like, you wouldn't be able to speak. You would understand what people are saying to you, but you wouldn't be able to say anything to them. So you may think of an old person who can't speak because they had a stroke, but they understand you just fine. They have what's called Broca's aphasia. It's caused by a stroke or a tumor on the Broca's area. Now, how do you remember this? Think Broca boca. Boca is mouth in Spanish. So Broca boca, mouth. Broca is for speaking. Wernicke's is for understanding. So here's a guy with Broca's aphasia. He had a stroke, and the only way he knew how to communicate is with the bell, but he couldn't speak. But he was a very intelligent man. He just couldn't speak because his Broca's area was damaged. That's from the show Breaking Bad. All right. Damage to a small part of the occipital lobe. Okay, so think about it. Occipital lobe, occipital, optical, vision. The answer is B. Language is controlled by what side of the brain? La 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 left, la 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 language. Because that's where the Broca's area is. That's where the Wernicke's area is. It's on the left side. La 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 left, la 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 language. Broca's area is located on the la 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 left frontal lobe. A person with damage to Broca's area would most likely demonstrate which of the following symptoms? Broca boca, speech. A person will most likely develop aphasia as a result of damage to which of the following parts of the brain? Okay, so you have Broca's aphasia, but you also have Wernicke's aphasia. An accident victim is shown a picture of a car and says, "Die." This person is suffering from what? Broca's aphasia. Can't speak very well. My grandma had that after a stroke. Okay, so you need to know, what does the left side of the brain do, the left hemisphere, and what does the right hemisphere do? You write this down. La 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 left, la 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 logic. That is done by the left hemisphere of the brain. Your left hemisphere also does arithmetic. That's like basic math, like 3 plus 5. That's left brain, arithmetic. The right hemisphere does creative task. So if you're a musician, you use your right side of your brain a lot. Spatial tasks. So if you have a question, like for example, you're playing Tetris and you want to know, how do I rotate this object and make it fit? That's the right side of your brain. If you're packing the trunk of your car and somebody asks you the question, will it fit? You're using your right side of your brain. Reading emotions. When you read people's emotions, you read their facial expressions, you are using the right side of your brain. Reading people's facial expressions is done with the right cerebellum. And the right side of your brain controls the left side of your body. Okay. All right, so the blank lobe is to hearing, as the occipital lobe is to vision. Okay, so which one of these does hearing? The answer is B, temporal lobe. Temporal lobe does hearing. All right, check this out. Interesting question. An individual was admitted to the hospital after experiencing a mild tingling on the right side of the face and a sudden inability to speak. Using an MRI, a doctor would likely find what? Okay, hit pause. Okay, so if you're having trouble speaking and you're having problems with the right side of your face, then the answer is A, because Broca's area is on the left hemisphere, and the left hemisphere controls the right side of your face. If you thought E, that's not a horrible answer, but remember an MRI is black and white. There's no red and yellow in an MRI. Okay? And it wouldn't be highlighting activity, it would be less activity. Okay. Which of the following assertions is best supported by empirical evidence, meaning scientific evidence, something that you can see in a laboratory with some sort of MRI or fMRI or EEG or PET scan or something? In other words, which one of these is not a myth? And the answer is A. Your left brain and your right brain do different things. Speaking is done with the left side of your brain. The right side of your brain tends to be more creative. They do different things. But all this other stuff is not backed by science. Okay? D, left brain and right brain people, while that's usually a myth. Okay? We always say that creative people are right brained. That is a myth. But creativity does come from the right side of the brain. But there is no right dominant or left dominant. That is a myth. Blindness could result from damage to which cortex and which lobe of the brain? Okay. So obviously it's visual cortex. So where is the visual cortex? The answer is D, occipital lobe. Okay. Now, if you say E, great, but you need to be more specific than cerebral cortex. It would be visual cortex. Okay. E's not a horrible answer, but it's D. According to the theory of evolution, why might we call some parts of the brain the old brain and some parts of the brain new brain? Okay, so remember the bottom of the brain is the old brain. That's the hindbrain, that's the medulla, and the cerebellum. And then the new brain would be like the prefrontal cortex. But the answer, hit pause, but the answer is B, evolution. In most people, which one of the following is a specific function of the left hemisphere? Left hemisphere that is typically not controlled by the right hemisphere. Okay, so which one of these does the left hemisphere do? Left, language. Okay, this is important. Brain plasticity is basically your brain's ability to heal. I do have a video on my website that I hope you watch. It's about a little girl who has half of her brain removed. And although this girl had half her brain removed, she was still able to walk. Not very well, but she does it. She can dance. And she's all grown up now, but there's a really good video. It's 6.5 minutes long, and I really hope you watch it. It's about brain plasticity. Now, when you think about plastic, I don't want you to think about like a hard plastic. I want you to think like a really soft plastic, like saran wrap, something that's soft and flexible. And your brain, if it gets damaged, then your brain can, I don't want to say heal, but it basically is healing. What it'll do is different parts of your brain will change shape and take over the functions of the damaged part. So let's say your Broca's area gets damaged in a stroke. Well, after 15 years, you might actually start talking again. It won't be the same, but you can actually start talking again because your brain is plastic. It's kind of healing. What happens is neurons will actually reroute the messages to go around the damaged parts to maintain function. The younger you are, the more plastic your brain is. So if you're going to get into a hunting accident and get an arrow shot through your brain, do it when you're 6. Don't do it when you're 50. Okay? Because your brain will heal much faster when you're 6. Not the easiest question in the world, but hit pause and try to answer it. The answer is E. It's about new connections. Now, it's not about regrowing damaged neurons. The problem with C is that there's no damage. A has damaged, but that's at the neural level. All this other stuff, there's no brain damage. You have to have brain damage in order for this to be the right answer. So the answer is E. All right, guys. There is a part of your brain in the middle called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum, and this is what students write down, it's a piece of basically cartilage in the between your left brain and your right brain. And what it does is it allows your left brain to communicate with your right brain. Here's a really cool picture of it. So imagine you open your skull and you split open your brain, kind of like the Red Sea, and you see this corpus callosum. And look at all the wires. You know, it looks kind of like a computer, sort of. That is the corpus callosum. It allows the left side of the brain to communicate with the right side of the brain. Okay? So the two cerebral hemispheres are connected by a band of fibers called the corpus callosum. The answer is A. Now, I forgot to teach you this. And you'll see this if you watch a video on called the split brain. But what will happen is that some people, and this is very rare, but they get a really bad case of epilepsy and they get a lot of seizures. Seizures are storms of electricity that go through your brain. Okay? Well, in extreme cases, sometimes a neuroscientist will go in there and snip, 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 and they will cut the corpus callosum. And what that means is that the left and the right side of your brain aren't communicating. So in this case, in extreme cases, surgically severing the corpus callosum is a treatment for which of the following conditions? And the answer is epilepsy, B. Okay? Now, that's not very common, okay, but it does happen. Basically, if you stare at this, the dancers will spin in different directions. Some dancers will spin one way, and some dancers will spin the other way, and your friend will see it spinning in a different way, possibly. Okay? I don't know if it's real or is it an optical illusion, but we look at this in class. All right, what is split brain? I'd rather you just watch the video. It's not easy to explain. It really isn't. If you get your corpus callosum cut, then your left and your right brain don't communicate anymore. If you get your corpus callosum severed, then your left brain doesn't communicate with your right brain. So this woman is not a normal woman. Her corpus callosum has been cut. So they ask her, look at the dot. And then her right eye sees the word art. Her left eye sees the word he. Okay? And they're not communicating with each other. They ask her, what word did you see? And she says art. Because now I know this is really confusing, but basically I have to repeat myself a million times in class. It's not easy to explain. But the Broca's area is on the la left side. And that's the part of your brain that allows you to speak. So the left brain controls the right eye. So she can only speak about what her right eye sees. But whatever she sees on the left, her left eye is controlled by the right side of her brain. And her right side of her brain does not have a Broca's area. So she can't speak about the word he, but she could take her left hand and point to it. Crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. Okay. Hit pause and read that. So hit pause and do this. Say the word, say the color of the word, not the word itself. So here you would say green, red, blue. And it's really hard to do at first. Supposedly, it's a left and a right brain conflict. This is a tough question, but this is the only one that I've ever seen on the AP exam, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. So hit pause. The split brain patients are unable to do what? And the answer is B. They are unable to speak about what they see on the right hemisphere. That means the left side of the body. Because your Broca's area is on your left hemisphere, not your right hemisphere. It's confusing, I know. Okay. All right, that's it, guys. Thank you very much.